During the peacetime conferences of Yalta and Potsdam, it was decided that Germany would temporarily be divided into 4 sectors. These would each be occupied by the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The West felt that Germany needed to recover quickly in order to safeguard European economy. Truman was consequently alarmed to hear from his economic advisor that across the country, millions of people are slowly starving. Stalin feared that this would cause Germany to revolt against the Soviet Union. The Western leaders, determined to encourage economic revival, began to reform the old German currency in 1948. They agreed to form a new German state from their existing sectors. The economic chaos in the 3 Western sectors began to improve.
Stalin was enraged by what was happening outside his sphere of influence. The German capital was deep inside the Soviet zone, and the introduction of the new currency in West Berlin was seen as encroaching upon Soviet control. What's more, the USSR, having suffered so much death and destruction at the hands of Nazi Germany, wanted to keep the country weak. France shared this belief, but the US believed that economic recovery was the key to stability and peace across Europe. As a result, agreement over Germany was fraught with tension and conflict.
On June 12, 1948, Stalin closed all supply routes, canals, roads, and railways to Berlin. He hoped that the West would drop their plans, or at least abandon Berlin. The Russians initially claimed that the closures were due to road repairs and technical difficulty. However, it would mean potential starvation for the 2.2 million West Berliners who relied on food and fuel supplies from the Western zones. It was a clever tactic from the Soviets, because any attempt to force their way through the blockades would be seen as an act of war. However, the Americans remained defiant. General Clay, who was in charge of the US occupation zone, stated, "There is no practicability in maintaining our position in Berlin, and it must not be evaluated on that basis. We are convinced that our remaining in Berlin is essential to our prestige in Germany and Europe. Whether for good or bad, it has become a symbol of American intent."
Rather than trying to force their way through the land blockage, the Allies flew in supplies from the air. This was a difficult and mammoth task. Berliners needed anything up to 9,000 tons of food and raw materials per day to survive. However, Soviets did not shoot down any supply planes, fearing that it would lead to open conflict. The boot was now on the other foot. In all, 200,000 flights were eventually completed. Despite Stalin's best attempts to disrupt life in the Western sector, supply planes took off and landed every 3 minutes in West Berlin. Attempts to bribe West Berliners with extra rations or cutting off vital power supplies were unsuccessful. Some 10 months since its construction, Stalin acknowledged defeat and finally lifted the blockades.
In the ongoing propaganda war between the East and West, Truman stated, "We refuse to be bullied. This action was a Russian plan to probe the soft spots in the Western Allies' positions." The success in overcoming the blockade was a huge propaganda success for the US. Soviets responded by stating that the blockade was a propaganda idea devised in Washington. They also claimed that the blockade was self-imposed.
The failure of the Berlin Blockade saw the creation of 2 new German states. This division completed the political and economic division spreading across Europe. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany came into being. In the East, the German Democratic Republic was established. This blockade convinced the US that the Soviet Union was a large enough threat to warrant a military commitment to Europe. A mutual assistance pact was signed with US allies in Europe, creating the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This pact committed each country to the defense of the other members if they were attacked by someone outside of NATO. It was intended to provide collective security against the threat of the USSR and their allies. 6 years later, the USSR and its affiliates responded by signing their own alliance in the Warsaw Pact.